Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie, and today, I want to share with you a story about my mother-in-law, Sarah. That's been a long time coming. It's not the easiest tale to tell, but it's one that's shaped so much of our lives. As it stands now, Sarah has no control over our lives because we've made the difficult decision to sever ties with her. Reaching this point wasn't easy. It wasn't something we arrived at overnight. It took years of enduring manipulation, guilt, and emotional abuse. And yet, here we are, having made the choice that, for our peace and happiness, we can no longer have her in our lives. Sarah is the definition of narcissism. While I'm not a psychologist, it's easy to recognize the signs. She's self-centered, controlling, and entirely focused on her own needs. There's no empathy, no understanding, just a constant demand for attention and validation. What she doesn't realize is that her manipulative behavior has affected everyone around her, especially her son, my husband, Paul. And then there's Paul. He's the complete opposite of Sarah, kind, considerate, and deeply caring. I believe his personality was shaped largely by the fact that he was mostly raised by his father after his parents divorced when he was young. His father was everything to him, his protector, his provider, his role model. Paul's relationship with Sarah didn't flourish until after his father passed away from a terminal illness, and that's when things really began to spiral. From the stories Paul has shared with me, it's clear just how much Sarah controlled his life. He once told me, "Jamie, my mom demands so much from me. She feels like she's entitled to everything I own, and expects me to care for her forever, no matter what." It was hard for me to fully comprehend until he shared more of his childhood. He told me about how, when he started working during his school years, Sarah took his entire paycheck. She didn't need to work, she never had to. Paul was her constant source of income, and he never had a say in it. For the longest time, he thought that level of control was normal. But that's not normal, Paul, I told him, incredulous. She basically enslaved you, working while she did nothing but sit in her apartment. You've been carrying her your whole life while she's done nothing to help herself. I know, Jamie, he admitted quietly. I've tried talking to her about it, but she always guilt-trips me. She makes me feel like I'm abandoning her or that I'm the only one who can take care of her. Even when I suggested she get a job, she refused. She just won't listen. It was painful for me to watch Paul struggle. He had student loans piling up, yet he was still sending money to Sarah, despite the fact that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. She stopped working when Paul was just 17, the same year he got his first job. From that point on, he was forced to be the breadwinner for both of them. Sarah isolated him from extended family, telling him that he didn't need anyone else. She controlled everything, his time, his money, even his social life. Paul didn't have friends because Sarah wouldn't allow it. He couldn't afford a phone, let alone anything else. Then, when Paul decided to go to college, things got even more complicated. Despite Sarah's best efforts to stop him, Paul fought to get an education, finally breaking away from the suffocating hold she had on him. College introduced him to a whole new world. Away from his mother's overwhelming influence, Paul began meeting new people, people who lived life differently, and for the first time, he started to see just how abnormal his childhood had been. The more he learned about independence, the more Paul realized how controlling and emotionally manipulative Sarah had been all his life. Still, even after all of this, Paul continued to support her. He couldn't seem to break the chains she'd wrapped around him. 3 years into our relationship, I felt like I had no choice but to confront Paul about the situation. It had gone on long enough, and I could see that it was eating him up inside. "Paul, your mom has been emotionally abusive to you for years. She's manipulated you in every way possible, and as it stands now, Sarah has no control over our lives because we've made the difficult decision to sever ties with her." Reaching this point wasn't easy. It wasn't something we arrived at overnight. It took years of enduring manipulation, guilt, and emotional abuse. And yet, here we are, having made the choice that, for our peace and happiness, we can no longer have her in our lives. Sarah is the definition of narcissism. While I'm not a psychologist, it's easy to recognize the signs. She's self-centered, controlling, and entirely focused on her own needs. There's no empathy, no understanding, just a constant demand for attention and validation. What she doesn't realize is that her manipulative behavior has affected everyone around her, especially her son, my husband, Paul. I invited Sarah over, knowing things were about to reach a boiling point. As Paul walked through the door, He looked at the scene and asked, "Hey, what's going on here, Jamie? You told me to come home soon. Did something happen?" "Something's definitely happened, Paul," Sarah declared, her voice dripping with drama. "Your overbearing wife and her mother are trying to take over your house. I'm here to save you from this monstrous family." Paul, visibly stunned, responded firmly, "Mom, what the hell is going on? Why would you disrespect my wife and her mom like this? They're right here." He turned to me, silently giving me the floor to explain. I took a deep breath. "Let me tell you exactly what's been going on," I began, ready to expose the chaos Sarah had caused. Paul stood frozen in the middle of the living room, clearly processing the situation. "Oh my God, are you serious?" he said, turning to his mother. "Mom, did you actually pack up Jamie's stuff and send it to her mom's house? Did you come into our home and move things around? Who gave you the right to do that?" "I'm just trying to help you, Paul," Sarah responded, feigning innocence. "You need to reconsider your marriage. I've been telling you not to put up with her freeloading behavior. I could find you a better wife." "Mom, I've told you so many times not to interfere in my marriage. Why are you still doing this?" Paul's voice was growing more frustrated. Sarah fired back, her voice rising. "I'm standing up for you, Paul. Your wife will drain your finances if you don't end this. That's why I moved in with you. I'm staying here now. Stop calling it his house." I stepped in, my voice firm. "Sarah, I've already told you, this house belongs to me. If anyone's mother is staying here, it will be mine." Paul's exasperation was palpable, but Sarah was on a roll. "Look at what your witch of a wife is saying. I told you she's a gold digger. She's already trying to claim this house as hers." "Mom, stop insulting Jamie," Paul snapped, his patience breaking. "This is ridiculous. She's right, the house belongs to Jamie. It was part of her inheritance after her grandfather passed away." Sarah's face drained of color as the truth hit her. My mom, standing quietly in the corner, couldn't help but chuckle at Sarah's discomfort. Paul, meanwhile, was on the verge of losing it entirely. Desperate to regain control, Sarah tried to argue. "It doesn't matter, since you two are married. This house is yours too, Paul. I have a right to stay here. Why should I live in a rented apartment when you have a perfectly good house? I won't let Jamie take everything from me. You need to kick her out." "Mom, you need to leave," Paul said, his voice rising. "I've had enough of you interfering in my marriage. No matter how much you dislike Jamie, I'm not leaving her. You've crossed the line. You are not staying here. Your wife is blackmailing you. Paul, you can't stay with her," Sarah screamed. "Trust me, it'll be better if you divorce her. I'll find you a new wife." The situation quickly escalated. Paul shouted at Sarah, his anger boiling over, while I joined in, furious at her actions. The room was tense, and it was clear that something had to give. At my breaking point, I took charge and kicked Sarah out. She looked to Paul for support, but he couldn't even meet her eyes. I grabbed her suitcases from the guest room and threw them out the door, following her. Sarah sat on our doorstep, crying for a full hour. I warned her that if she didn't leave, I would call the police. Eventually, she got up and left. Inside, Paul was apologizing profusely, guilt weighing on him. My mom, sensing the need for space, went into the kitchen to give us privacy. "Jamie, I'm so sorry. I should have cut ties with my mom years ago. All this time, she's been attacking you, and I kept letting her into our lives. I thought she might change, accept you as my wife, but now it's clear she never will," Paul said, his voice filled with regret. "I understand, Paul, she's your mom, and you've felt a duty to take care of her, but her behavior has been unbearable. She tried to kick me out of my own home," I replied, my voice firm yet tired. "I know, Jamie, and I can't believe she went that far. Don't worry, she won't get away with this. I'm cutting off all financial support to her. She doesn't deserve anything from me after what she's done. You won't have to deal with her again," Paul promised, his tone resolute. We spent hours discussing boundaries and how to move forward. By the end of it, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. To lighten the mood, my mom stayed for lunch, and we ordered some food through DoorDash. Despite the chaos, the day ended up better than expected. Though I was still reeling from my belongings being displaced, it felt oddly satisfying to finally put my foot down with Sarah. My mother had already contacted the moving company, and they agreed to return my things, though it would take a few days. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to make trouble. She bombarded Paul with calls and flooded me with texts accusing me of controlling him and forcing him to cut her off. I showed Paul all the messages, which only fueled his anger. He got into several heated exchanges with her in the following days, and it felt like we were stuck in a cycle of chaos. That cycle broke when we decided to take legal action. We filed a police report for trespassing, theft, and harassment. The police were shocked by the extent of her actions, and Sarah's behavior was taken seriously, even if it wasn't violent. We informed Sarah of the police report, and our lawyers began working on a restraining order, but she didn't back down. She showed up at our house, furious. "How dare you file a police report against me? I'm your mother. I deserve respect. Paul, you can't do this to me," she screamed. "I'm done being silent, Sarah," Paul replied. "You've overstepped. What you did was criminal, and you're not entitled to anything here anymore." I added, "Sarah, you need to stop shouting. We've made our decision. Only the homeowner and her mother are staying here from now on. Since you're neither, you need to leave." My words were the final straw. Sarah completely lost it, and her breakdown only worsened, and a neighbor came over to ask if they should call the police. Sarah lunged at him, shouting, and the neighbor immediately dialed 911. The police arrived soon after, and Sarah was arrested. It was a scene of pure chaos, but it was also what we needed to secure a restraining order. Paul then suggested something I hadn't expected. "Jamie, I think we should let your mom stay here for a while," he said. "Sarah knows her address and won't stop harassing her. She's escalating, and I'm worried she might get worse. It might be safest for Rebecca to stay with us." I hesitated, unsure how this would affect us. "Are you sure about this, Paul? I don't want it to be uncomfortable for you, and I don't think Mom would want to impose." Paul reassured me. "I feel bad for Rebecca. It's the right thing to do. I'm fine with it. Honestly, it'll be better for everyone's peace of mind." We shared a quiet laugh, the first moment of levity in a long time. Although the situation was far from ideal, Paul was taking steps to distance himself from his mother's toxicity. Cutting ties with a narcissistic parent is never easy. We've been talking about therapy for Paul to help him cope, and while he's open to it, he needs time. I'm here for him, supporting him as best I can. Meanwhile, Sarah, unable to reach us directly, has been trying to manipulate my mom, claiming she has nowhere to go and is now living in her car. It's a hard truth, but no one is willing to help her anymore. Paul has made it clear that he will not financially support her again, forcing Sarah to face the reality of finding a job, something she's terrified of. After everything that's happened, we've reached a point where we simply don't care about her plight anymore. For the first time in years, we feel free of her control. It was harsh, but it was necessary for our peace of mind and to regain control of our lives. I could hear the pain in his voice, the weight of years of guilt and obligation. "I understand that, Paul, I do," I said softly, "but think about it. You're drowning in debt, and it doesn't seem like it's ever going to end. How long can you keep doing this?" Paul didn't have an answer, but the truth was sinking in. Continuing to support Sarah meant he'd never be able to escape his financial burdens, his emotional chains. He'd never be free, not until he made some drastic changes. It was heart-wrenching to watch him struggle with the idea of cutting her off, even though we both knew it was the only way forward. Sarah had manipulated him for so long that it had become a part of his identity. He was trapped in a cycle of guilt, responsibility, and financial strain, and he didn't know how to break free. Every day, he was faced with the same dilemma: keep giving in to her demands and continue to drown, or cut her off and finally start living a life for himself. It was a hard choice, but one that needed to be made, and in time, we knew that we would have to take the hardest step of all, to sever all ties and break free from the toxic influence Sarah had over him for so long.